In Spreading Gateway, I'm Asia, and we're going to talk about the opposite side of connection, and it's disconnection, because we know that we, as beings, have the choice to connect or disconnect to whatever we choose to, right? Depending upon our will. And these energies are also expressed in the fifth house. On the star map, especially when it comes to dealing with the ego, because the ego is a way of identifying energies of connection and disconnection, and all the energies pertain within that. So that is a science within itself, but it is important for us to be able to identify and come to conclusions for our individual selves based off of intuiting information for ourselves. And this is by way of connection, the star map, that you can see things for yourself depending on your level of self-responsibility, or if you may be participating in certain belief systems. I don't know, but it's science, and I don't know why it would be denied as a science of life when all these other forms of sciences are considered sciences. Like science of the spirit and science of forms, they both go hand in hand and are very necessary to understanding information. And these are things that are most definitely understood unless you have no awareness of them. Awareness, scaredness, wanting the will to know. Like these things go hand in hand. These principles, the principles of the fifth house, the will to know. That's where you direct your attention, your energy, your emotions. So disconnection is very important, especially when it comes to things of a spiritual nature, because as we have went over before, spirit is synonymous with life. If you don't like that word spirit, you can call yourself life-ual. Okay, we are at all times life-ual, spiritual, because we are spirit existing in form. And this is our many ways of expression, how we exist, and the laws of operation in which we are able to exist. This is our form of connection to life and each other, our individual lives and life outside of us. So if we're not connecting to these principles on which life is formed, right? Life is built upon, then we are disconnected from that. If you're not aware of what's going on in your environment, not just in its physical elements, but also in its spiritual elements, then you are disconnected from the spiritual things that are going on all around you at the same time. A lot of people are doing that without even realize that's what they are doing, because they're in some form of belief system. A lot of times we get senses, Senses aren't just something you feel and taste and touch. They're what you perceive. They're energies you pick up on. Sometimes you just get a feeling. That's something spiritually happening. But you have to be able to perceive it as such. But that's a form of connection, right? When you deepen your connection, you're able to sense and perceive more things happening around you in your natural environment. Nature just isn't a place that you go and visit. Nature is happening at all times around you. That's part of life. It's like people describe themselves saying, I'm in my natural element. Like, yes, the fuck we are. Our own environment, we have our own environment. Our energy holds its own environment. So that's how we connect to our natures, by perceiving our environment and ourselves. So if we're disconnected from that type of information, then it's going to have no relationship to you, and you will most definitely be unaware until you are. But disconnection is very important, because if we're trying to build in certain ways, then we should be able to know how to use these things. Use connection, know how to make the right connections, know the healthy way to build connections for ourselves individually and collectively around us. Because if we do it for ourselves, then we're more willing and more able and more positioned to help everyone else. But we have to be able to identify these things and decide for ourselves, like take a look inside and span on self and notice all the things that we are connected to as individuals, where we connect to mentally, physically, and spiritually. And if that's the thing, if those are the things that are serving us, but that's based on our own individual compass. And a lot of people are not in tune with their compass, which is a way of finding your compass, okay? Because we also have an external compass that's represented in time cycles and different energies happening, governing our existence. They also have a way of operation and a way of being and purpose and reasoning, just as much as we do individually. But it's up to us to know that. So we must identify what we are connecting to, what our forms of connection are, especially when it comes to information. Because when it comes to things on a screen, just like everything else, those things should be used, but you should also have the spiritual representation of what you're doing when you're going to connect to other things outside of yourself, when you're connecting to other information, and if that information is aligned with you and your purpose in being. Because a lot of people are in belief systems and think that some other person's information has more weight over their own individually. That's up to you to perceive. Nobody is responsible for telling us the truth. Otherwise, they would do it automatically. Lie wouldn't exist, but it does, because people have a choice to lie, and they do it every day, especially when it comes to information. And that's based on the spirit. But if you're not aware of the spirit and how they operate and how they move, then you could get lost in information because you connected to that shit. So connection is very important, and for us to decide individually what we connect to and what we disconnect from. And when it comes to information, this is the greatest, as I've seen so far, a way of connecting to information, especially when it's spiritually, and how to combine those elements with the educational systems. It broadens this perspective, so you have a way of perceiving through your third eye, if you want to call it third eye vision. Okay, you become the observer of what's going on in your environment. I mean, you can step outside of yourself and be able to recognize spirit, recognize your essence and how you are operating these things. And then you can see what's going on around you. But you have to understand that you're connected to spirit. If you don't see yourself as such, then you won't be, period. Then you won't be. But what I'm trying to show is that these things are possible, and they're also known, okay? Because just because you are not connected to something doesn't mean that someone else isn't. And that would be very naive and egotistical to assume. Know for ourselves. Take responsibility for ourselves and the things that we connect to, right? We can see that spiritually through our many forms of connection. You plug in your phone and you know that your spirit is trying to connect something. That's a spiritual aspect of what you are physically doing. But you have to see it as such, because it happened in the spirit before it physically happened. Like, you're like, oh, you come to a thought, I need to charge my phone. That didn't That form is not expressed yet, right? It's only expressed in a thought, but it's not expressed in physicality until you actually go plug in your phone to connect to power, to energy. There are many forms of connection. Connecting to energy, give and receive of energy. Okay, these are happening on spiritual levels. What you put your energy into, what you're connecting to, right? What can be taken from you energetically if you're not aware of what you're doing energetically. Because what we can understand based off of spirit, that there's positive and negative connections, right? Everything exists within the universe, good or bad. That's why there's no really the other perception of good and no, there's no good and bad. There is good and bad, but there's no good and bad. It's duality. They both exist at the same time, just based off of the judgment and perception of the individual and how they are operating their spirit, their connection, their energy. But we all have to, I keep saying we all have to, but you know what I mean. It's best for us to have a form of connection informationally, right? That's outside of man, and that each individual can identify for themselves. Because we've come into a belief system that we can't even do that. That somebody else's information is more important than our own conclusions. And that's dangerous. That's dangerous. That's up for each one of us to decide. Thank you. What are we connected to? What do we need to disconnect from? Very important observations to make, especially in building the life that you want to live, right? Because you want to make sure you are connected to the things that are gonna serve you and benefit you, right? And that is very important spiritually, because it happens in the spirit before it manifests. It's important to have a spiritual connection, be connected to spiritual things, the forms that you can't see, your thoughts, your emotions, your imagination, your intuition, your environment, your spiritual environment, right? You don't just have a physical environment, you have a spiritual environment. And this is a representation of those things in those many different forms and environments. And this is a way for us to all be able to connect to these energies and understand them for ourselves based off of our own awareness and our own knowledge. So that is connect and disconnect scientifically. Numbers are also represented on here, because that's a way to connect and disconnect, right? Is through numbers. What else? Symbology. All these things are connected. This is science. Science is a way to connect.